The coronavirus pandemic has claimed now more than 100,000 lives in America over the past 4 months. It's the highest total of any country in the world. Our North America correspondent Ali Makboul has been speaking to some of the families who have lost loved ones.
Happy birthday to you.
Friends and relatives of more than 100,000 people in America can now just cling to the memories of happier times before the coronavirus.
You know, my father was a really caring person, and he just wanted to help people. And he was really outgoing. You know, he thought he was really funny.
Doug Lambrecht was one of the first confirmed deaths back on the 1st of March.
As somebody who lost someone so close to them and who was obviously very, very dear to you so early on, when you saw the way this was going in the country, how has it made you feel over the last couple of months?
It's scary. It's sad. I feel angry. We should have been listening to the doctors and the scientists. We should not have been listening to people talking about the stock market.
It's natural that people are reaching for answers, for someone to be accountable after scenes like mass graves being dug in New York and refrigerated trucks lining up to receive the dead once the morgues were full.
If the Lord says so, I'll see you Saturday.
We now know that African Americans, like Rhoda Hatch, are still dying in disproportionate numbers.
I think 100,000 is an extraordinary number. It means that there's a lot of pain and grief. But some of us in the Black community are very concerned that as the narrative became that African Americans were disproportionately impacted by the virus, that there was also then a push to open up the country that many of us think, prematurely, that again suggests the devaluation of Black life.
Those calls to reopen go on, even as the number of dead continues to mount and as the nation mourns. Well, flags have most recently been lowered here after tragedies like mass shootings, and even then it's been difficult to grapple with the scale of loss after sometimes dozens of people have been killed. But how then does America even begin to count the emotional cost of such a staggering number of deaths? To really do justice to the stories of those lost would take many lifetimes. For people left behind, the question lingers. Could more have been done so these Americans and tens of thousands of others might still be around? Ali Makboul, BBC News in Washington.
And I can talk now to Frank Langford, who's a correspondent at NPR, US National Public Radio, who joins me now from Weybridge. Frank, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. An incredibly grim tally to be talking about, 100,000 deaths. One report has the virus infection rate still going up in approximately 20 states. What has been the public reaction to news of this figure being passed?
I think it's a huge milestone for the country, and I think it has a big impact. The United States, which before this happened, people in the United States thought that the country was prepared for this sort of thing. Clearly it was not. And to be not only the country that suffered the most deaths, but has crossed this incredible threshold, I think it has people reassessing the country's effectiveness at dealing with these sorts of things. The United States is normally very good at dealing with these kinds of disasters and problems. And so I think it's really shaken people all over the country.
This is clearly a public health emergency. It's also a political emergency in some countries, depending on how the public view a particular government, a particular leader has handled the situation. Clearly, it's a pressing one for Donald Trump, up for re-election, he hopes, in November. And he himself has been talking about this pandemic in terms of his election. He has created that narrative. I mean, how do you think his handling of the pandemic and this death toll, and it's still on the rise, affects his chances for a second term?
I think it will be front and center in the final 5 months of this election race, as unusual as it is, because obviously Joe Biden has hardly been able to go out and the president hasn't gone out much. But I think that as we get close to November, the big question for people is going to be just what you heard in that earlier report, is what more could have been done. There are reports out of the United States that say even if the country had locked down a bit earlier, a week or two earlier, it could have saved maybe tens of thousands of lives. And I think that President Trump is going to have to contend with that. The other question is going to be, where's the economy as we move into October and November, and how at an individual level do people experience this? Do they know people who have died? Are they out of work as they prepare to go to the ballot box? That's going to be crucial to President Trump's chances to be reelected.
And President Trump has been, repeating the line, we cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. He's clearly very focused on the economy. But, if you look back a few weeks, he was talking about the economy opening up at Easter again. Clearly, that didn't happen. It was much, much too early. So do you think in the remaining months between now and November that we are going to see, perhaps more so than ever before, a really bitterly fought campaign, with lots of blame being flung around?
I think so, and I think if you're on the Democratic side, you know the kinds of commercials you're going to run, because Donald Trump, because he's out there so much since January, first, for a long time downplaying this. Now it's 100,000 dead, over 40 million Americans out of work. You can just imagine, it's very easy to figure out what kind of campaign that the Democrats will run against him. He will push to get the economy into recovery as soon as possible, and that could help him. On the other hand, even though we've seen good things out of the stock market is not the American economy, and it takes a long time for jobs to come back after such a deep recession like this. So I think anybody else, honestly, at this point, any other candidate, incumbent, it would be very hard to imagine they could win a re-election. On the other hand, Donald Trump, as he's proved over and over again, is a unique president in modern American history.
Yes, and clearly some of his supporters are, utterly devoted to him. They absolutely believe in this, "Make America Great Again" slogan. But, with the economy in trouble, as economies around the world are in the wake of this pandemic and still during this pandemic, for those voters who might be persuaded to change their minds, how much is this pandemic going to shift thinking away from Donald Trump and towards Joe Biden?
I think that's just a great question, Anita. I think there are very few people for these two men to fight over. Most Americans know Donald Trump very, very well. And I think it is going to come down to the economy and to personal experience with this pandemic. If Joe Biden is going to win any other people over, it's going to be because people have lost faith. His supporters have lost faith in him, Donald Trump, bringing back the economy, or because they know people who've lost their lives and they feel the president deserves some responsibility for that.
OK, Frank, good to talk to you. Frank Langford, correspondent at National Public Radio, US National Public Radio. Thank you very much.